When I was growing up, my mom would bake a lot of muffins and cookies and stuff like that. And I always remember that she would ask me to pass her the margarine, which I would grab out of the bottom shelf of the fridge. I also remember that when I would go to school, my classmates would be drinking this low-fat milk, and my pediatrician eventually would tell my mom that I should be drinking whole milk instead of skim milk. But the skim milk stayed in my house. Most of the stuff that my mom would buy from the grocery store was low fat because saturated fat, as we know, is the fat that would be the end of us. So to my surprise, a few years ago, when I learned about the importance of fat-soluble vitamins and how they're found in animal products, I felt completely duped. And in my journey to learn more about what to put into my body and what not to put into my body, I found out about the vitamin that everyone conveniently forgot to tell us about, vitamin K2. Now today, we'll go over what role or roles vitamin K2 plays in the human body, how it can benefit us, and the foods where we can get it. Stick till the end to make sure that you don't miss out on this forgotten vitamin. Also, as with all of my videos, I'm just a normal person trying to learn more about stuff, so I'm not giving any kind of advice whatsoever. First off, as I mentioned before, K2 is a fat-soluble vitamin. This means that it's absorbed in the fats that we eat, as opposed to water-soluble vitamins like C and B, which dissolve in water. The other fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, and E, and our bodies tend to hold on to fat-soluble vitamins for longer, which can be a problem if we get way too many of them. Water-soluble vitamins, on the other hand, are excreted through the urine, and we need to replenish them frequently. Before we talk about anything else, let's clarify why we're talking about vitamin K2 and not K1. In short, vitamin K1 hasn't been associated with the same bodily functions, processes, or benefits that K2 has been associated with. What's unique about vitamin K2 and not K1 is that it's exclusively found in animal products and fermented foods. The highest food with vitamin K2 that you can consume, even if you're a vegan, is natto.
Oh no, bro.
Natto is a fermented soybean dish from Japan. It's hard to find information about a couple other fermented soybean dishes, but Korea has two dishes called doenjang and cheonggukjang. They're both pretty difficult to find outside of Korea, but they should theoretically also be pretty high in vitamin K2. In short, the bacteria that multiplies as the soybeans ferment produce vitamin K2. Keeping with the topic of fermentation, sauerkraut has some K2 as well, and kimchi should also have some. But the levels in sauerkraut or kimchi won't be as much as in other foods. And while we're on the topic of bacteria, technically strains of bacteria in our gut can produce vitamin K2 if we have those strains. But antibiotic treatment can actually wipe them out. So unless you've gone your whole life without being prescribed antibiotics, you probably need to get your vitamin K2 from the foods that you eat. K2 is also high in dairy products. You might want to consider raw milk or raw cheeses if you're able to purchase them in your area, but whole milk, cheeses, butter, and kefir all have vitamin K2. In general, full-fat dairy products contain way more vitamin K2 than low-fat options. This 2018 study that looked at the vitamin K2 content of European cheeses actually found that aged cheeses have considerably higher amounts of K2 than younger cheeses or curd cheeses, and that raw milk cheeses had the highest concentration of vitamin K2. So if you can find raw milk cheeses in your area, that might be the way to go to get your daily intake. But if aged cheeses aren't your thing, or if you can't find any raw milk cheeses, beef liver, cod liver oil, and egg yolks all contain vitamin K2 as well. So those are all the sources of vitamin K2, but why do we need it? What does it actually do? Studies have shown an association between higher vitamin K2 intake and fewer cases of heart disease, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, fractures, and even lower instances of tooth decay. But what do all of these conditions have in common? It's calcium. Calcium is involved in all of these conditions. It plays a key role in stiffening arteries and hardening the plaques that cause atherosclerosis. Calcium deficiency can lead to weaker bones and weaker teeth. Blood coagulation is also involved in some of those conditions, and vitamin K1 and K2 play an important role in this process. One thing that K2 does that K1 doesn't, though, involves calcium in the body. When we ingest anything with calcium, vitamin D helps our body to absorb that calcium, but what vitamin D can't do is put that calcium where it needs to be. That's where vitamin K2 steps in. It's thought that the way that vitamin K2 decreases blood pressure, heart attack, and stroke is by helping put the calcium where it belongs. Calcium isn't just important for our bones and teeth, but it's also a key component of neuronal function in a process called calcium signaling, which in a nutshell means that it helps our cells do what they need to do, such as regulating enzymes and proteins within each cell. By making sure calcium gets to our bones, teeth, and neurons, that means that calcium gets kept out of places where it really shouldn't be, namely out of your arteries. This helps keep arteries more flexible, which in turn contributes to low blood pressure and a lower chance of developing cardiovascular issues. Another very cool thing about vitamin K2 is that it's associated with lower instances of dental caries, or tooth decay. This 2016 paper explains vitamin K2's role in the development of bone, as well as enamel and dentin in our teeth. The current hypothesis is that vitamin K2 plays a key role in remineralizing teeth and allowing the dentin to heal. This means that minor dental cavities can actually heal to a certain extent, provided you get enough vitamin K2, and D3 and calcium, since they all work together in this process. It's important to note that these are all associations, and at the moment there's not enough research to really suggest a maximum daily intake of vitamin K2. The NIH recommends a daily vitamin K intake of 90 to 120 micrograms, but doesn't distinguish between if it's vitamin K1 or vitamin K2. It's also worth noting that most of the information out there, as with many other studies, isn't complete, and more studies are needed to say for sure what the dose-response relationship is between K2 and its roles in the human body. So, should you take a vitamin K2 supplement? You should definitely consult your doctor to get an idea of what your vitamin K2 intake should be and if you would benefit from supplementation. Since vitamin K in general is involved in the blood clotting process, it can react with anticoagulants like warfarin, which is also called Coumadin. What's been working for me lately is significantly decreasing the amount of processed foods and carbs I've been eating and increasing whole foods and proteins. I make sure to have grass-fed beef liver and butter as often as possible, and so far I haven't had any problems with cavities. Anecdotally, I've had a cracked molar for over a year that I thought for sure I'd have to get pulled and replaced with an implant, but after eliminating processed sugars and carbs and replacing them with foods high in vitamin K2, my tooth has been completely fine. I've had no pain 80% of the time, and if I have like a chewy, tough food, like something that's like full of cartilage or something like that, sometimes the crack reopens and I have a bit of pain. But when that happens, I just 100% avoid sugars and carbs for a while, maybe like a few weeks or a month, and the pain completely disappears again. Vitamin K2 is probably the most forgotten vitamin, except for maybe choline, which may or may not be considered a vitamin. So many people talk about these vitamins online, and I get the feeling that we're sort of expected to just know about this stuff, but really most of us do not know about this stuff. I highly recommend doing a bit of your own research into vitamin K2 because there's a good amount of scientific literature out there indicating that it's beneficial for us. So after reading about vitamin K2, it sounds like the low-fat craze in the 80s and 90s, and probably up until today, probably could have led to a significant amount of tooth decay, frail bones, and calcified tissues. And speaking of calcified soft tissues, there's also some articles that say getting an adequate level of vitamin K2 might actually help to prevent kidney stones, which is really interesting to look into. But what do you think? Have you ever tried increasing your daily intake of vitamin K2? Why do you think vitamin K2 is one of these vitamins that flies under the radar most of the time? It's crazy to me that there are essential nutrients found in stuff like animal fats, when for the longest time I thought that animal fats are just saturated fat, and saturated fat is bad for all of us. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something new, please like or share it with a friend. Comment below to continue the conversation about vitamin K2. We'd love to have you as a subscriber if you enjoy content like this. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.